Shooting raw images is absolutely the best way to get the most from the images that you take with your digital camera, yet this video is titled Reasons Not to Shoot Raw. Want to find out more? Stick around and enjoy the video. Welcome to the Photo Genius channel. Hi, Paul here from Photo Genius. Welcome to my channel where I post regular photography tutorials, all designed to help you get more from your digital camera so you can take better photos. If you are new to the channel, please consider subscribing. So my channel is all about helping you take better photos, but here I stand making a video that suggests that you shouldn't shoot raw format images when every channel out there is telling you to shoot raw images. And just for clarity, I choose to shoot raw, but when it suits me. And that's the reason for making this video. I don't think anyone should feel pressurized to shoot using a format that may not suit them and their type of photography. So the reason I chose to cover this topic in this week's video is simply because it's a question that I get asked all the time, particularly on my courses and workshops that I run here in Brisbane. So in this week's video, we're going to take a look at what are the differences between JPEG and RAW images. I want to talk about the advantages, but also look at the disadvantages. So by the end of the video, you can make an informed decision that suits you. So let's begin by taking a look at the JPEG image format, which by the way stands for the Joint Photographic Expert Group. Now this is the format that your camera would have been set to in the factory by default. And for that reason, it's usually the format that most people start off with and are more familiar with. So this camera is set to record JPEG images. Let's take a look at what happens the moment after you press the shutter button and take a picture. Digital cameras capture light via the sensor and effectively convert the images into numbers. Lots of numbers. The image is then processed. Here's where things like your white balance settings will be applied. The image may be sharpened, shadow detail may be enhanced, and if you've chosen a particular picture style, that too will be done automatically by the camera. The next step is called compression. The goal here is to make the image file smaller, and it's important to know that in doing that, a lot of data is lost. This is often noticeable in the shadows and highlights. More on that later in the video. Once done, the file is then saved to the memory card as a JPEG. Now there are actually some real benefits to shooting your images as JPEGs, but equally of course there's going to be some disadvantages, and to give you the big picture, let's take a look at both. JPEG files are relatively small. This means more images can be saved to the memory card and less space is required on your computer or storage device. As an example, this number shows how many raw images can be saved to the memory card in this camera. Now let's change the setting from RAW to JPEG. Now the number increases by over 3.5 times. Because the image is effectively already developed in camera, the image may not need any processing or editing. The JPEG format is also supported by almost all devices and software, so a JPEG image taken with this camera can be viewed on my laptop, on my desktop, phone or iPad without any issues or any specific software needed. The smaller file size also means that a JPEG image can be easily shared to social media as an attachment in an email or printed. Now if you need to use the continuous shooting mode to shoot subjects like sports or wildlife, then you may find that shooting JPEGs will also have an advantage here as well. For example, I've set this camera to record large JPEG images. Now as I hold the shutter button down, you can clearly hear the camera has no problem at all taking a burst of images. But if I change the image quality from JPEG to RAW, you will see a difference. Initially the camera has no problem, but soon slows down due to the much larger file sizes. This is called buffering, and the light on the back confirms the camera is still saving data to the card. The main disadvantage when shooting JPEG files is that when editing, your options will be fewer. Now this of course is mostly a result of compression and reduced data. For example, take a look at these two images side by side. At a glance they look very similar, and for sharing images to social media, the JPEG may well be more than ideal. However, we only need to zoom in to see the difference in clarity and detail. So what happens when you set your camera to shoot raw images? Well, things would be very different. This is because with raw images, there is no loss of data because there is no compression or in-camera processing. Instead, all of the data captured by the camera sensor will be saved to the memory card as a raw file, sometimes also referred to as the digital negative. In fact, a RAW file isn't even an image. Instead, it's a large file containing lots of data, including a JPEG version of the image you just took. So with this camera set to shoot RAW, if I take a picture, what I see on the screen on the back of the camera is actually that JPEG, not the RAW image itself. So now let's take a look at the benefits of shooting RAW images versus the disadvantages. As just mentioned, with RAW files you get all the data, so you really are getting the most from your camera. More data means a wider dynamic range, which means more highlight and shadow detail. You can also correct and adjust, if necessary, things like white balance. More data and a larger file means you can also print larger. And finally, raw images are non-destructive. This means that no matter how much you process the image, you can revert back to the original state with just the press of a button. Now, if you're not into editing your images, shooting RAW files may not be for you. Now, this is because straight out of camera, RAW files will look flat and lacking in contrast. This, of course, is because the image has not been processed. Now, remember, what you see on the LCD screen on the back of the camera is actually a JPEG preview, not the actual RAW file. To process a raw image will require software. Now, my recommendations are to look at Adobe Lightroom and Luminar Neo. To give either of these a go, look out for the links below the video. Now, there is also no standard RAW format. Now, this means that straight from camera, a RAW file may not be viewable on some computers or devices. So, after editing and processing your image, you can save it as a number of different file types, including, of course, JPEG. Now, RAW files are also much larger than JPEGs, so storage may need to be considered, and as demonstrated earlier in the video, may even slow the camera down. Now, at the very beginning of this week's video, I did mention that I choose to shoot RAW files most of the time. There are some exceptions, one of those being if I'm using this camera, which is my Fujifilm X100V. This is my grab and go camera. It's a great little camera, and the JPEG images out of this camera are simply stunning. Plus, shooting JPEG means I can take advantage of the Fujifilm film simulations, which you can also customize. They're a lot of fun. They apply to JPEGs, but not RAW files. So which format should you choose, JPEG or RAW? Well, despite what people will tell you, RAW isn't everything, and it's certainly not for everybody. If you're not quite ready for doing things like editing images and post-processing, then I would definitely recommend shooting JPEG images. And that doesn't stop you from being creative either, because in your camera, there's a function called picture styles. And using this, you can be more creative with things like your image colors. You can do things like shoot black and white. I've actually just put out a video all about it. If you want to check it out, you'll find a link at the end of the video, but I'll pop one up here as well. Okay, so now I want to share a bonus tip for those of you that have stuck it out to the end of the video, and that is if you are shooting JPEG images and you decide to edit your images, when you save that image, it is recompressed. Now, we've learned in this video that compression means data is being thrown away and your image quality is sadly going down. So you want to try and do your edits all in one go. You certainly don't want to be doing multiple edits and saving multiple times, otherwise your image quality will deteriorate really rapidly. This doesn't apply to RAW files. So I really hope you've enjoyed this week's video. If you did, please consider giving it a thumbs up, because that helps my videos get noticed and that will help the channel grow. If you're not already subscribed, consider subscribing so you don't miss out on future videos. And that's it, other than to say thanks for watching, and I hope to see you again sometime soon. See ya. Bye.